Good morning, and welcome to this, as I just found out, the 19th gathering that we've had. You know, initially, we could have, with the COVID problem that we're having, we could have just postponed it and not done anything this year, and that was considered, but we really wanted to continue forward and basically adapt to the situation. And this is what we kind of put together. And we hope you really enjoy it. I mean, a lot of time and effort has gone into it in terms of recruiting people and getting and putting it together. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Najimi, the president of the MTA.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Any of you who have been to a retiree gathering where I've spoken, you hear me say regularly that you are the pillars of public education. You built the foundations of our public schools before ed reform wrestled it out of our hands. And the activism of those who have come before us, the organizing of all that have come before us, always lays the foundation for what we are able to do today. Many of you are still in the fight for education justice and very active on some MTA committees that are critical, showing up at demonstrations, really helping keep your locals connected to retirees. We need you to still stay in the fight for public education because you hold the institutional knowledge of what education can and should be. And that's so critical in helping our educators of today understand that the education reform version of education is not the right form of education. We all know that education should be based on a curriculum that lifts up and affirms the identity of our students, no matter what their race, gender identification, socioeconomic status is. We know that high stakes testing has pushed out everything that matters and put us on a narrow focus of getting ready simply for college and career. And really 20 years after high stakes testing, we've seen the evidence that it hasn't even done that. I hear more often than not from our own higher ed members that our students are coming into our college universities without the knowledge and skills, the creativity, the critical thinking and risk taking that they used to come to college with, because that's what MCAS has done to us. We know that our students living in poverty should be able to come to a school that has healthy and clean air to breathe. Schools have become really community centers where the problems of society that our leaders refuse to fix because of historic disinvestment in communities of color and low-income communities come into the schools, and then we are the ones who are expected to solve those problems. And if that's what they want schools to be, then we need to fight for a vibrant community school movement. We're in a moment now that nobody could have ever imagined, and not one of us has actually ever experienced. And our elected officials just want us to provide, and the Department of Education want us to provide a normal education that is at a time where it's anything but normal. Pandemic education simply cannot be the same kind of education as if it were normal times. The two fundamental problems here are the Department of Education now is insisting that we follow the same curriculum at the same pace, with the same time on learning requirements short of 10 days that we actually won as a union for 10 days of planning before instruction started. And here we are trying to make it work. Each model brings its own challenges. I joke with Jackie Gorey, imagine if she and I both were still teaching kindergarten, we would have to either figure out how do we bring half our group of 5-year-olds together and keep them 6 feet apart, when in real life, you can't even keep them 6 inches apart, right? How do you teach a kindergarten class without a block area or an art table or a sand table? It's simply too dangerous to have those kinds of things in a classroom at this moment. And yet imagine Jackie and Andre knows this experience well from his own grandson. And many of you, I think, know this experience because you're grandparents. Imagine trying to acclimate a 5-year-old to his or her teacher and his or her peers remotely. None of it is great, but remote learning to this point has been the safest so far. So it's not working the way it should be working. And it's simply because our federal and state government refuse to fund public education to the level that it takes to educate kids during a pandemic, and that's no surprise. They refuse to fund public education to the level that it actually takes to educate all of our students, pre-K through higher ed before the pandemic. And that's what the Fund Our Future fight was all about. And that's what the fight for the Cherish Act is still all about. So we need you, and you have an exciting agenda today. You're going to be talking about elections. And what I said at the board meeting just this weekend, if we really look at what's happening to our elections, we have a president who is already claiming that the elections are rigged. We have Republicans trying to set up election boxes without authorization. We have our president calling on white supremacist militia groups to stand down and stand by. We have militia groups training to do polling watching. That's voter intimidation. We have attempts to dismantle the post office. That's voter suppression. In any other country, and when we talk to immigrant families, even our members in higher ed who have come from the global South, people around the world actually understand this election as an attempted coup, not just a constitutional crisis. You'll be talking about institutional racism and social justice and climate change. They're inextricably linked to each other and to what's been happening in public education for 20, 30 years. And in some communities of color, low-income communities, it's what the systems have been built on. And you'll be talking about retiree activism, which to me is one of the most exciting parts. When you and other retirees come together, you have power to make a change. And when you come together in your locals from which you retired, or in the towns with other educators where you live, we have power to act and power to change our circumstances. In this pandemic, we have been organizing in a way that has brought MTA members into their locals in ways that they've never participated before, attending meetings on a regular basis, developing contract action teams, solving problems collectively, and then working with the MTA at the state level to build a campaign to return to schools safely and to fight, the cuts and the layoffs and the dismantling of public education. So while it's a complicated moment, while it's a stressful moment, it's an anxiety-producing moment, there's hope in action. And when I look at this agenda of this gathering, and when I see there's almost 150 people registered virtually, that's another place that I find hope that we can really wrestle back the schools our children deserve, the colleges and universities that our students deserve, and that we can continue to fight collectively to also make sure that our retirees can live with economic security, with health care, and just be secure overall in retirement. So welcome and enjoy the program today. I think, am I turning it over to Max Page, our Vice President?
Thanks, Mary. Good morning, everyone, our wisdom warriors. I hope you're well and safe, and also fired up for the election and all the other struggles that we have in front of us. You know, I was just thinking about it this morning as coming to this event, and I was thinking over the past roughly 2.5 years that Mary and I have been in our positions. Some of the very best moments are when members from different locals support one another, and then when retirees join in to support the local struggles, whether over contract or any other issue. It is really incredibly gratifying. It's incredibly powerful. And I think of like the Dedham strike or recent Sudbury actions or the Fund Our Future rallies at the State House. Having retired members there in support of their locals and their members from the towns they taught in is just incredibly powerful. So, you know, as Mary said, we have so much to protect and defend, but we also have so much to win. Just like the right wing does, we on the left have to use this moment of crisis to highlight the inequities and how we have to once and for all fix them. So we have these incredible opportunities and we have to take them, and we're relying on our over 10,000 retired members to be a part of those fights. We have to protect our students and our members against COVID. And frankly, also against the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is often is putting our members and our students in harm's way. And that's been a big part of the struggle, is for a safe reopening. We all want to be back in the school buildings, in the classrooms, but want to do it safely. That's been a big struggle over the past several months. But it's also our job to continue to lead on safe reopening of schools and colleges and universities. How do we do that now? How do we do that come the springtime? We have to lead on that, and I think we really have been. We're also trying to stop the MCAS. We need your help on that. You as well know as well as any, or better than any, how the MCAS has restricted the kind of teaching that goes on in our public schools, and how it is really a proxy for inequities along race and class lines. You know, one of the great victories we had with the help of retired members was the Student Opportunity Act. We passed that, one of the great victories for all of us. Hasn't been funded yet because of the pandemic. We need your help to get that back on track. And as Mary said, the second part, the B side of the Fund Our Future campaign was fighting for the Cherish Act for public higher education. And we know whether you're a K-12 member, retired member, or a higher ed retired member, access to high quality public higher education is important for every one of the MTA members. Winning on progressive taxes. And of course, also, we need to win for a fair and just retirement for all of you. And that continues to be a fight. This past weekend, we ratified our budget priorities for the coming year, and made sure that retired member issues were right on there, and made sure that the state maintains its commitments to fully funding the retirement systems, so that you all can have a dignified and just retirement. I'm really excited. Just the last couple words is that while other unions and other organizations are cutting back and laying people off, I'm really pleased the MTA has continued to move forward and to hire more staff to support locals and members across the MTA. And that's really exciting. And that is moving forward right now, along with our Blueprint project. So I'll just end by, quoting my neighbor, Emily Dickinson. Her house is a couple blocks away, as well as the cemetery where she resides. She wrote this line that's sort of famous around here in a letter to a friend. She said, "We turn not older with years, but newer every day." So I hope that you, like our 175-year-old beloved MTA, feel newer every day and ready for the great struggles ahead to defend and advance public education. So I'm looking forward to being part of this great series of discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Max and Mary. Moving on to Andre Joseph, the retired representative on the executive board of the MTA. He'll have a few words on retirement benefits and also the budget anyway. So go ahead, Andre.
Good morning, everyone. It's a strange moment in our history. I think most of us on this call this morning can remember what mimeograph paper smelled like. Max, you're just pretending to nod. Come on, you youngin'. But now we've reached a moment where we're sharing information through this medium, and it is certainly a curious time. If you would allow me some indulgence, I will share with you the wisdom and response of my 4-year-old grandson. Every day I've been going over to his house and sitting with him as he is supposed to be on 6 hours of Zoom kindergarten. 5 minutes into the first kindergarten lesson, he took a self-portrait that he had made, and this is what he did. And he put it up in front of the screen and fled immediately over to pick up a bunch of Legos and start to build a dinosaur. It is not normal times. And we need to invent the solutions collectively as to these problems. The board tried to do this. So I am the representative of retirees on the executive committee. I feel like one of my responsibilities is to report to all of you as retirees what we're doing up there and to try and share the information in as transparent a fashion as possible. So if I may, a brief report on the recent board meeting. We spent time discussing the difficulties of school openings. And the specifics of those difficulties vary. We have hundreds of locals across the state. We have people working in elementary schools. We have people working at the university level. So the problems look different in different places. But collectively, the experience is that nothing is normal and that safety is not being paid attention to in an adequate fashion. The solutions lie not in an individual response, but in a collective response. And as our leadership just mentioned, in making sure that there's enough money for public education. So we share those experiences with one another and committed to trying to find those collective solutions in what I'm sure that all of you are looking at the papers and the rates of infection and recognize that the sadness is upon us. And unfortunately, it's not hard to predict that tragedy will be upon us soon as well. So we can't put our heads in the sand on this. We need to demand that there should be safety for our students, for all of our members, and for the community. That's going to require going to remote education in all sorts of circumstances, at least temporarily, until cooler and more rational heads respond and we're able to create safe situations. A second matter we addressed at the board meeting is negotiations. So I know many people here on the call have been lifetime active union members and see things from an employee perspective. Those of us on the board are faced with a curious notion of now becoming, in a sense, management, because we are the people with a fiduciary responsibility for the MTA. In that capacity, we negotiate with 3 different unions that represent the employees of the MTA. And I'm pleased to report that we've reached a settlement with the largest of those unions, the Field Staff Organization. And that settlement includes an agreement that more people will be hired and more staff will then be available for organizing and to represent our members across the state. We've also consolidated the leadership of managers in the different divisions of the MTA. Some new people have been hired. So we are looking to the future with a consolidated organization and an increased capacity to deal with the circumstances that we're facing. Finally, we were taking a look at the upcoming elections, which are now 2 weeks and a day away, 15 days. And they're certainly an extraordinary historical moment. And they will be crucial to our nation, to our Constitution, to our democracy, and to public education. In that moment, then, I would encourage you to join our efforts in getting out the vote. The Mass Teachers Association and its staff has organized phone banking. Massachusetts seems to be a state that will be reliably in the camp of Biden and the Democratic Party. So our phone calling is actually going to swing states around the United States. It would not be a cold call in the sense that you're reaching out to a stranger. The calls will be to other educators. So if they pick up the phone, you can identify yourself as an educator, and there'll be something in common immediately. Sarah is sharing the link on the MTA webpage, and there is, if you can look in the chat, there's another way to link there as well. If you have the ability and determination to do a couple of hours of this, we would welcome that and make our efforts all that more powerful. Finally, I would talk to you about the COLAs. Max mentioned stability and dignity of financial security in our retirements. Usually we've been receiving a 3% increase on the first $13,000 of our COLA. But that's only if a budget is passed for the entire year. And the COVID circumstances has led to a situation where the state budget is only complete now through the end of October. Hence, I'm sure you've noticed that we have not received to date an increase of a COLA on our retirement pensions. We hope that will change in the near future. The state budget, as I mentioned, will expire at the end of October, so there is pressure on the legislature to pass a year-long budget, which we are promised that would include a retroactive COLA increase back to July 1st when it's in fact passed. But as welcome as that would be, we in the MTA find that insufficient. And so once again, we will be filing legislation to increase the COLA from the rather modest $13,000 at the beginning. All of this happens, of course, in a moment where there's financial pressure. And the revenues have been impacted by COVID, both on a national and a state level. So it makes the need for us to put pressure on for adequate funding for public education and for our retirements. Finally, I would welcome you to contact me with any questions or comments or suggestions. You can reach me as an individual. I'll put my email in the chat, and you can find me on the MTA webpage under the executive committee. But especially if there are locals that have organized retiree groups, I would welcome the chance to communicate with them, and then at a more normal time to come out and visit. My local Concord Carlisle has a, quote, veterans division, and we have 50 to 75 people meeting, at least pre-COVID, for lunches to share information and tell stories about grandchildren and also support our existing active members. I know Cambridge has such an organization, and I would welcome information about other locals that have been able to organize their retirees as well. So thanks very much for being here. I look forward to a great week. And to make the best of a very difficult circumstance. Above all, please stay safe, both for you, for your families, and for whoever you might be potted with. And my grandson, Luco, and the others send their best. Be well. Patrick, back to you, please.
Yes. Thank you, Andre. And now, yearly we do on our own, and as was the case with doing this whole thing, we considered, postponing it, but we plowed ahead, and we basically selected someone, and Jackie Gorey is going to talk about that. So go ahead, Jackie.
I'm Jackie Gorey, And along with my friend Ann Wass, we both represent you on the board as a board of directors member, and we're both on the retired members committee as well. And it's my pleasure today to announce to you the Honor Our Own Award recipient during these very unprecedented times. These unprecedented times, how often have we heard these words and how often have we used these words since March? And more importantly, how often has these unprecedented times altered our lives? Because of these unprecedented times, this annual gathering cannot allow us to gather. And because of these unprecedented times, our ordinary daily activities have become anything but ordinary. And because of these unprecedented times, our real lives feel secondary to our lives on Zoom. But despite all these changes, there is one constant that will never become secondary to the MTA Retired program, and that's its members, and that's our Honor Our Own Award. After deliberating on the nominations, the committee has chosen a leader in our profession, a leader in her local, and someone with whom I could always see eye to eye because we're both vertically challenged. And that's our 2020 Honor Our Own recipient, Judy Babb. Now, I saw Judy somewhere up there and there you are. Hi, honey. How are you? It's so good to see you, and congratulations from all of us. Let me tell you a little bit about Judy, because there's a lot to tell about Judy. Throughout her teaching career as a fifth grade teacher, and I know some of you out there are fifth grade teachers as well, in the town of Wakefield, Judy demonstrated all the qualities of an outstanding educator. Her students were her top priority. She created a positive and supportive environment in her classroom where she constantly considered the whole child. Not only during the school day, but after school and weekends, Judy was in constant contact with her students, parents, support faculty, and administration in order to provide for each of her students. Judy recognized early in her teaching career that in order to have a quality education system, she needed to be a strong advocate for students, educators, public education, and social justice. She also realized that this could only be accomplished by participating in the political process. Judy's political activity included constant lobbying of elected officials and working on local, state, and national political campaigns, such as the election of Ed Markey and Catherine Clark. Judy's political involvement stemmed from her leadership position as president of the Wakefield Education Association and as a member of the MTA Board of Directors. During this time, Judy's understanding that the value of serving her own community through public service translated into her own campaign for public office, and she became a Wakefield Select Woman. Judy used this office to create public policy that positively affected education, the public employees of the town, and the well-being of the Wakefield citizens. Judy's leadership of WEA allowed her to inspire many association members to become involved politically and to work on campaigns and to continually petition local and state officials on education and on labor issues. While performing her teaching tasks, her union duties, her political activities, Judy found the time to pursue an advanced degree at Suffolk Law School, where she earned a Juris Doctor degree. Judy used this degree to further her philosophy of always being there for others, and she counseled many colleagues and conducted many workshops on legal matters for educators. Now, among those colleagues that she formed special bonds with throughout her career were the ladies. So let me tell you, she's gonna laugh now. Let me tell you about the ladies. The ladies, their story begins in 1986 in a group of friends. Judy was one of the founding members. All were members of the MTA Board of Directors. Some were leaving the board and some wanted to stay in touch with each other. Thus began 34 years of amazing, amazing friendships. No matter what happened to any of the ladies, Judy always had been the one with a smile on her face, and you probably could see through this whole thing. She was, yeah, there she goes. She's going to start again. She was smiling. And she always left the ladies with her famous words, smile and think positive. Judy, The ladies are very proud of you and all that you've done for yourself and accomplished yourself, but contributed to MTA. And I know Judy knows who these ladies are that I'm talking about, but for the audience, I'd like to tell you who they are because I know they'll ring bells in your head. First of all, Beth Cook, formerly known as Mary Beth Carlson Cook. She's one of the ladies. Kathy Harrigan, who's a former member of this committee, Jean Smith, and posthumously, congratulations from Sheila Walsh and Nancy Finkelstein. Now, Judy, you left the ladies and you left Massachusetts to venture to Indiana to be with your family. We understand that. But we also know that you just recently relocated to New Hampshire. That's okay. But we're really happy that you zoomed back to Massachusetts to accept this award. So, Judy Babb, an intelligent activist and educator, an involved and invested community member, a laugh riot, and our 2020 Honor Our Own Award recipient. Can we all stand, put on our microphones, and give Judy the best cheer that we can ever do? Judy Babb.
Yay, Judy!
Extremely proud of you, Mom.
Great job.
Judy.
Oh.
Say hi to us,
That's my dog, Judy.
Judy, would you like to just say hey? The ladies?
Hey. Hey, I just want to thank you and the board for the award. I received this lovely plaque and check. I think the previous speakers who have spoken have stressed on the unusualness of this year. But I think right now we need to focus, and we don't have a lot of time. The next 2 weeks, we have to get out there and vote. We can't leave this place the way it is. We have to change it. And it'll take every one of us actively working for the next 2 weeks to make sure that happens. I also want to thank Mara Buckley, who nominated me, and I appreciate all of you. I know you have a lot to do, and I'll throw it back to you, Jackie. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for those words. It is no surprise that Judy Babb is saying, get out and vote, get everybody else to get out and vote. It does not surprise me in the least. And there's that smile. Judy, we're so thrilled for you. And we hope that next time you come to Massachusetts, it's not via Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who was especially on this line for Judy. She's a remarkable woman. And we're all happy to have had her as our friend and still have her, even though she's in New Hampshire. So I'm going to throw this back to Patrick, and yay, Judy, good to see you. Take care, and thank you, everyone.
Yes, getting out the vote, and especially if you live in a battleground state, you should be voting. Massachusetts, I think, is pretty secure in terms of Biden's election, but New Hampshire, I don't know. So that's important. Anyway, I've been tasked with basically going through a very brief summary of the different workshops that you have available to you for the week. And they're all, they're given the time of crises that we're in, they're all really kind of speaking to that issue. Not simply in terms of contemporary events, but also reaching back into the past so that we can kind of understand the past the way in which it has helped us to understand the present. So beginning with that, a very kind of nuts and bolts thing that we're all concerned with because we're all retirees. The first workshop, which happens today from 2 to 3:30, is essentially an informational workshop about retirement in terms of helping you think through in terms of the implications of it. The presentation that's going to take place is going to be about what the presenter, Henry Quinian, calls an emotional pension. People focus on the financial end of it, but they oftentimes lose sight of of the need to consider the psychological and in terms of how you're going to think of yourself and what you're going to do with your time, et cetera. And Henry Quinian is going to be talking about that. Each day, we also have a lunch program that basically is sandwiched in between the two presentations, the presentation in the morning and the presentation in the afternoon. The lunch program connects with the morning presentation, and the lunch program, basically from 12 to 1, will be essentially organized as a question and answer series. We're a discussion group in a way. If you have questions about your retirement or retirement setting, this is the one to go to. And you don't really have to sign up for that. You can just show up and participate in the discussion. Okay. So moving on to Tuesday. We're in the midst of an election, okay? And we basically recruited two speakers, Joshua Dyke and John Cluverius, both from UMass Lowell, political scientists, to essentially talk about the election process. What's going on in terms of basically purging voter rolls nationally, and things along those lines. And it promises to be very interesting. And the lunchtime discussion for this one is essentially a discussion about the election for 2020, and that will be facilitated by Seth Evans. So moving on to the afternoon, Kate Clifford Larson will be speaking about the suffragist Helen Osborne Storrow. If you're not familiar with Kate, she's written a number of books, one on Harriet Tubman, another on Mary Surratt, who was involved in some way in the assassination of Lincoln, and Rosemary Kennedy, the forgotten, basically the daughter that they kind of hid away because of there were psychological issues, etc. But this one is essentially about the suffragette. You know, we know about Storrow Drive. This probably explains where the name came from. I mean, she was part of, she married into a Brahmin family in Boston, was involved not simply in terms of suffragette movements, but also kind of empowering women back in the early 20th century, and basically providing a role model for all of us. So that's Tuesday from 2 to 3:30. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, there will be an interesting forum of Louise Gaskins, Josephine Bernard, Robin Smith, Carol Doherty, Ann Wass, and Edith Cannon, essentially about the issue of institutional racism and social justice at the MTA. In terms of it's going to be probably a reflection on the history of how the MTA has dealt with the issue of racism within school systems, things along those lines. This is promises to be a very interesting presentation, and I'm looking forward to it. And the lunchtime for that one is an NEA movie. The history of the NEA will be followed by an open discussion facilitated by Louise Gaskins and Edith Cannon. So in the afternoon, there will be a workshop on institutional racism in education, dealing with the way in which it plays itself out in terms of our students, among the faculty, and issues along those lines. And that will be by Eric Bauer and Lucy Griswold. Okay. Thursday, continuing, there will be one from representatives from the Sunrise Movement, which is a student movement which is dealing with environmental issues, and Elder Climate Action, which is a group of seniors, us essentially, who are basically organizing, dealing with the issue of the environment. And that will be, will be kind of a continuation of last year's presentation by these two people, Ferd Walken and Craig Slayton. And the lunchtime will be essentially a continuation of that, the same people, including Seth Evans, dealing with this. So in the afternoon, COVID impacts on public education and the actions by the MTA. This is going to be led by Rafael Mori Arasso, who is someone who taught at UMass Lowell in the labor studies program, I believe. And he has basically, he's taken the position within the MTA dealing with environmental issues in terms of building and stuff like that. And given that the COVID crisis has created basically new issues, or actually a recognition of that the old issues really hadn't been dealt with around issues of ventilation and things like that, Rafael will be dealing with how the MTA is responding to the environmental issue, particularly in terms of the health of buildings. And the last day, Friday, you all, there's a group called, that I'm involved in called the Wisdom Warriors. And we've been basically attending actions throughout the state on various occasions to provide support, song and dance. Largely, the kind of the force behind this is Elaine Corey. And she and Paul McClory, who is head of the activist element within the MTA, within the MTA itself in terms of organizing that. They're going to be doing a presentation on retiree activism in the age of COVID-19. And the discussion will basically continue along those lines during lunchtime. And finally, the last one will be about the way in which what's called neoliberalism. And what it is essentially, since the time of Reagan, what has happened is that the state has withdrawn supporting basically public institutions. And there have been cutbacks and stuff like that. And if you've been teaching since the time of Reagan, you know what I'm talking about. And what we're going to do is Max Page is going to be talking about this issue, but also Arthur McEwen, retired professor from UMass Boston, and basically explaining the kind of the shift in the economy that happened back in the time of Reagan, and basically how this has played out, and really kind of defined a lot of the issues around funding issues around education. So that'll be a particularly interesting one. So those are all of the presentations. At this point, looking at the time, it's what, 10:51. Where do we want to go from here? Is this it?
This might be a good time to take any questions.
Oh yeah, are there any questions? I mean, you can put them in the chat and we can try to answer them.
You can feel free to, put your name or type me in the chat, or go ahead and raise your hand. It looks like, is that Raphael?
Yes.
Raphael has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Raphael.
All right. I just want to add to what Patrick said about the COVID workshop that we are having on Thursday. And that is that, as Patrick also observed, we are going to discuss the fact that there are a lot of technical issues related to ventilation and epidemiology and pandemics, but that the real problems on this pandemic are political. and we are going to be discussing is what has been the MTA position on the pandemics and what are the political actions that have been taken to represent better the educators. So it's focused mostly in MTA actions.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that, Raphael. And there was a suggestion in the chat to introduce the retired member committee.
Yeah. Yeah. The list. I mean, this is what I mean. I think I have it in front of me here. Yeah, my name is Patrick Patterson, and I'm the chair, the new chair, Jackie Gorey is another member of the committee. She was the old chair. Okay, there is Mary Cowie, who's from Western Massachusetts. There's Seth Evans, who is from Eastern Massachusetts. He's going to be doing some presentations. Kip Faunch is in Western Massachusetts. Sylvia Golajov is an active member who is assigned to the board. Andre Joseph, who you heard from earlier, is our representative on the board. Richard Liston, Jen Marr, who is another active member who's been assigned to the board. Rafael Arasso, retired from UMass Lowell, as I mentioned. Ana Maria Nogueira, she's actually been stranded in Brazil, went down to visit her family, and the COVID thing broke out. In the last reporter, you read basically her report about that. Bonnie Page from Tewksbury, Robin Smith, Springfield, Western Massachusetts, and Ann Wass, also representative on the board. So that's the members of the committee.
Wonderful.
Okay, quickly.
Looks like Ann Wass would like to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Patrick. I just wanted to add a thing about the movie on Wednesday. That when it's about NEA, what it's going to be about, considering the theme that day is racism, it's about how the ATA, American Teachers Association, merged with NEA. And that ATA, up until the merger, our teachers of color were not allowed to join the union, and they had to have their own union, which was ATA. And when they went to do the merger, they looked around, and the most welcoming union national for them was NEA. And this is a film about the history of that merger and the promises that were made for representation. So it relates in that way to them. It isn't just a general movie about NEA, it's specifically about that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat or basically indicate that you'd like to speak. Okay. Nothing else? Okay. Andre, go ahead.
I just want to encourage everyone's participation. I mean, we have had decades of experience doing this educational stuff and doing union organizing. And the committee's worked hard, but by the end of the week, I would really enjoy hearing from lots of people in the various presentations. We have wisdom to share with each other and more work to do. So the varying perspectives and the commitments that people have made and the intelligence and experience that you've had, please step forward and share that with all of us. Thank you.
So any other questions, comments?
I just want to add on to what Andre said. I'm involved with a couple of the presentations on climate change and the idea of scheduling the luncheons to follow some of the presentations really gives people an opportunity. What we learned in the presentations can translate into further action. So, we befitting the times that we live in, we are, there's a lot of action orientation to this gathering, and this is a time for people to make connections with others who are also getting their feet wet with action or joining groups. And you really don't be shy about asking how to get involved or to volunteer your thoughts and ideas about what would be effective as a way of dealing with some of the issues we're going to be talking about. And the luncheon sessions are set up to really provide that opportunity, as well as the presentations themselves.
Anyone else? Okay, in the chat, there is a link for a survey for this session. Please take the time and fill it out. I mean, the way in which we can improve is essentially getting feedback, and it's important. So anyway, this is the end of it.